Hello fight fans, I'm here with Bob Mee. Bob Mee is a boxing historian, author of the book. You guys are going to be really interested in Tiger Flowers' book, and the book is Tiger Flowers Rose Out of Georgia. And obviously I'm here with him now. How you doing, Bob?
Yeah, good, thanks mate.
Okay, great. So Bob, so we're going to obviously start, let's go straight into the Tiger Flower book. So Bob, how did you go about researching Tiger Flowers and what made you be interested in him?
Yeah, he was just some guy that he was a guy that I knew nothing about really. He was just there sandwiched in the middleweight list of champions between Harry Greb and Mickey Walker, who are obviously great figures to boxing historians. I mean, I knew that Tiger Flowers existed. I knew he was called the Georgia Deacon, that he was said to be a deeply Christian man who came out of the South and won the title. I knew the basics, but I didn't really know about him, and I was idling looking at kind of possible books and possible stories, and the way I do it is tend to start a book, write, I don't know, 10, 20, 30,000 words, and then decide whether I feel like going on to make a book of it. And more often than not, I ditch it. But with this one, I got more and more into it, and I suddenly realised I'd got a story I wanted to know about. I wanted to get under the surface as much as possible and find out a little bit more of what made Tiger Flowers the man he was, the fighter he was. And I also learned an enormous amount that I didn't know in the process about what it was like to be black and coming out of the deep South in the first, certainly 3 decades of the last century. Like everyone else, I guess I knew about lynchings. I'd read the basics. I understood in some vague way that it was a terrible time and a terrible prejudice that was restricting so many people. But as I read more and more, I realised I was an innocent. I didn't know the half of it. I didn't know what these people had to deal with day after day after day. And that made me feel like I wanted to tell his story even more than to me. It was becoming more than just a boxing story.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's one of the cases that's been thrown under, and obviously you've restored him. And these things need to be uncovered. And like you said, it's historical, the stuff and what he went through. I mean, you were saying a bit about his background. Obviously, Deacon, so he became religious into the. That's weird though, because how can you be religious and be a fighter at the same time? I mean.
Yeah, his mother asked him the same searching question, and so did the people in his church when he wanted to become a member of a Methodist church in Atlanta. The congregation said, "But how can you reconcile your faith in God with a profession that is based on violence?" And he said, "Easily, that's my job. And ambition is God-given, and that's what I've got." And he quoted one of the Psalms to them, and basically gave them a good reason why it fitted in with his faith, that it wasn't violence, that it was sport, that he was ambitious, yes, that was God-given, and he was there as a person who would testify to his faith to people who didn't necessarily encounter that kind of thing. So for him, it was something. He said, "Blessed be the Lord, my strength." That was the quote he used, that psalm goes on to talk about He teaches my hands to fight, and in different context, obviously, but he used that to try and tell people, look, I can do what he saw as God's work. In that profession. And his mother always had a problem with it, I think. I mean, when he left home, she gave him a Bible, and he carried that with him all the time. And publicists made more of that than they needed to make, because obviously he was a rarity. He was a man of great faith who didn't shy from that. And in a pretty strange world, when he went to New York, which was obviously, you're talking about the Prohibition era, full of gangsters, full of individuals who've had no principles whatsoever beyond the lining of their own pockets, and he was. It's natural that some of the journalists of the day would think this is too good to be true. This guy is. He's a fake. There must be something in there somewhere, and they all got very cynical, and not one of them found anything to suggest that he was a fake at all, and they liked him. They thought he was great. He was a genuine man who did walk a straight life through this chaos and corruption and the rest of it. But I kept looking for things as well all these years on. I kept looking for hints and things that would. I didn't want to be accused of naivety, but I don't think I have been.
So set a scene for us. So where did he come out from? Was he born out of slavery, West Indies? Set a background.
Right, okay.
I don't want to go too much into your book because everyone wants to read it, but
that's all right.
Give it all. Go ahead.
Yeah, he was born in 1893, I believe. I've done research on his birth, and his birth is still a little bit kind of in doubt because he wasn't registered. He was born to a poor family in a small town called Camilla, Georgia, down in peanut and pecan country, and his family left there and went to the seaport of Brunswick when he was a small boy, and he was one of several children to a kind of honest, God-fearing, poor family. There would have been slavery in his background, but those people aren't on the registers. We've got his mother and his father coming from Alabama and Georgia. We haven't got his grandparents. We've got his wife's grandparents, but sometimes you just can't find these people. They're just not referred to, and they weren't living. Maybe somebody better than me will unearth them, but they would have been slaves in Georgia. His grandparents would have been. There's no other way. Occasionally there were freed people, freed African Americans who were able to exist without being owned, but there really wasn't a great deal. They didn't lead any privileged life, other than they weren't owned, and there weren't that many of those. So he would have come out of slavery, and I talk about what it was like for those people when they came out of slavery, and when I looked at. Because his wife was educated at Tuskegee, I think that's how you pronounce it, in Alabama. Sorry if it's wrong, but his wife was at the first great African American Center of Education, run by Booker T. Washington, when she was a girl, obviously when she was about 12 to 13 to 16, something like that, and she was there, and so I looked at Washington and his principles, because obviously she then had a great effect on her husband, because he didn't have a great education. He left when he was about 12, and Washington remembered the day of freedom. He remembered when he was a boy, and he said at first there was a great outpouring of joy. Obviously, we'd expect that. And then everywhere went quiet, and there was like a sober reflection. And he talked about the great responsibility of being free, about the fact that suddenly they'd got the choice to do things, and that was a new thing, and a new psychological experience for people whose parents and grandparents had perhaps lived in the same place or been sold on from somewhere else, and had no life of choice, and suddenly they'd got to deal with this, and it was a very strange psychological time. He also talked of during the Civil War, when they were in the South, they were in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, and they were on plantations, and because if they'd had families that had been relatively good to them given the circumstances, and had treated them fairly in context, they felt something for them. They felt a responsibility for them. They had their place in society, and he remembered that their family were desperately sad when one of the sons of the white owners was maimed or killed in the Civil War, and that man was fighting to keep them in slavery, but they still felt a sadness, and it was a very complex time, and I was trying to understand this and trying to understand what made we all come out of our grandparents, our parents, their experience, what they've gone through, and that would have been the same for him. And I don't know who his grandmother and grandfather were, but he would have known, and maybe that then becomes relevant. That's what I felt anyway. And then obviously there was the period of Reconstruction where people tried to rebuild, found it impossible, and then in comes the hard stuff, the original Klan and the vigilante groups.
Yeah, from the Civil War, yeah.
Yeah, after that, there was a period of Reconstruction when they tried to kind of get the country going, but it didn't work, and the number of black people who voted went down viciously, dramatically, from the 1870s and 1880s to the end of the century. It dropped because people were intimidated, because it was a time of great difficulty, and the lynchings began or increased, and white loose white groups of vigilantes or disadvantaged people or whatever were making life extremely difficult, and obviously that worsened. And I tried to go into that and put that in context so that you can see what he was coming out of. But it was something that we can only really get a stab at now. And I've done my best with it, but that's for others to judge.
Yeah, definitely. We'll go into that. I mean, you set the scene for the background of obviously, like what you said, obviously slavery and Civil War, and obviously a prejudice and stuff like that. So how did he? So under all them things, and how did he become a boxer then? I mean,
yeah, he met a heavyweight called Rufus Cameron, and he was working in Brunswick, and he was newly married. He'd just married his wife, Willie May, in the autumn of 1915, and he was 22. She was 4 years younger, I think, and from memory, sorry. And they'd got no money. He was just doing a job for $1 a day down at the docks, or trying his best, but they had no prospects. And somehow he met a heavyweight called Rufus Cameron, who was born in Texas, but then found his way to Los Angeles, and he was a kind of second-rate guy. He lost to the best fighters, but he made a living, and he travelled, and he went to Mexico, and he'd gone across America boxing, and he offered to give him a lesson, and Flowers was hooked. According to his wife, Flowers was hooked straight away, and he thought, this is what I want to do. And maybe he thought that Cameron had earned more money. Cameron was, I don't know Cameron's personality, but he was certainly outgoing. He was certainly, you can imagine that this small town kid working on $1 a day suddenly saw this guy come in who'd travelled, who'd had good money in his pocket, and was interested, and was physically very, very, very fit anyway, and wanted to learn. And there was a biography written of him just after his death, when he was famous, which was a big deal at the time, but obviously he's not. His name doesn't mean the same now. But in that, his wife was talking through the author. Her voice is very, very clear in that. It's almost like parts of it are her story, not the author's. And she said he was hooked from the beginning, and he would get up before work and he would train, and he'd go out into the garden and he'd punch his bag that he'd hung up on the washing line or something, and he'd just trained phenomenally hard from the beginning. He was dreaming already, and it was a neighbour who called him Tiger because his proper name was Theodore, and she was having a laugh at his expense that he was always outside, and she said, look at that guy, he's out there, you've got a tiger there, Mrs. Flowers, and it stuck. And one of the others suggested that she should get him locked up because he quite clearly wasn't right in the head. He was always outside hitting this bag and doing whatever Cameron had told him to do. So he was hooked on it from the start. Gets under your skin, doesn't it? It's the sort of game.
Yeah. we all know we're all bugged.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you, I mean, already said that. And I mean, the time when he started going, so to see the guy who taught him, was it like, did he come out the bare knuckle area, or he was talking at the gloves? Because I remember talking to Colin Alcott, he's saying the gloves then, they were full of horse feather, so I don't know, maybe his gloves are a bit more padded. I mean, they were basically like gloves.
They would have fought in all kinds of places where they did have gloves. It wasn't the bare knuckle era, it was after that. But yeah, the gloves may well have been pretty rudimentary things that, especially some of the fights they had, some of the places they fought in. There was like a carousel for black fighters. They'd go and fight in front of black audiences, and it was like, education for the African American people was deprived. Yeah, they got schools, but nobody cared about them. Nobody gave them good equipment, and you could probably say the same for the kind of circuit of that the African American fighters of the time trod when they weren't given anything to really help them. And you can imagine, can't you, that some of the gloves would have been pretty ropey things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, another thing I was going to ask you, so how did he, like at the time, okay, so the year we're talking about, black fighters didn't really fight white fighters, it was just becoming a bit, I mean, obviously after the Jack Johnson, they're getting used to it, so he's fighting obviously white. When did he feel like he could get this? Because I'm looking at his resume, and he fought Harry Greb, a young Bob Foster. I don't know if it was the proper Bob Foster.
No.
The Bob Fitzsimmons, Bob Fitzsimmons. No. And he fought Mickey Walker. Well, okay, it wasn't.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
he did fight white fighters, and some states allowed it. It took time. Each state had its own rules. And but even as late as 1925, the mixed fights, as they called them, were temporarily banned in California, which is supposedly one of the most enlightened states, and it was unheard of and unthinkable in the Deep South that black and white would mix. Yeah. I go into this stuff in the book where there are, there was a violent reaction against any suggestion that would happen. It did occasionally happen, and a fight would be stopped by some kind of local person who thought they had the authority to stop it because, the black guy might have been winning, and one of the most famous fighters of the time in Georgia was a guy called Young Stribling, a white fighter from Macon, Georgia, who eventually boxed for the light heavyweight and heavyweight titles, didn't win them. And he was young, but he was a contemporary of Flowers, and they were both famous at the same time, and he was the one man that Flowers said, I can't fight him. Even when they were in New York and all that was in the past, that Flowers would fight anybody and most people were accepting him. There were still the odd people who wouldn't fight him, but he said, I'll fight anybody, I won't fight Stribling, because if I beat him, if I'm lucky enough to get a fair shake of it and they give me a decision, I don't want the repercussions to happen to my people at home. I don't want my family to suffer.
Wow. Whoa.
Yeah, this was bad stuff.
Wow.
There was an incident. There was an incident when Stribling fought the white Irish light heavyweight champion Mike McTeague in Georgia, and McTeague tried to pull out of the fight, and the promoter got him and his manager into a room and said, "You see those two trees there? We've got enough rope. You pick the tree. You can go on there." And they were white, so this was a bad place.
Is that so? Stribling was affiliated with gangsters, or just
no? It was just the way things were.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And the black people could not walk down the street and look at let their eyes rest on a white man's wife. Mm-mm. They couldn't. I mean, there was an incident of a man, which I quoted in the book, of a man being lynched because a 3-year-old child picked up a nickel that he dropped. He took it back, and they lynched him because he'd taken his own money back from a child, a white child, and stuff like that. You could walk down the street and be arrested for nothing, and you would go into a forced labour camps, basically. There was a woman. I mean, I'm digressing, but this is how hard it was, and how careful you had to be. And he wasn't messing around when he said he wouldn't fight Stribling. There was a woman arrested for adultery. An African American woman arrested for adultery in Georgia. She was put in a cell. The sheriff refused to prosecute her because they found out that the man she was accused of adultery with was her husband. That didn't matter to the justices. They found her guilty. A guy came in on cue and said, "I'll pay a fine, and in return for that, you've got to work for me." She didn't know what was going on, and before she knew it, she was taken away and in a labour camp, and her family had no idea where she was, and she'd gone into a system. And then they could sell you on, and you could end up anywhere. And I've quoted various things like that in the book, which, that's the sort of thing that was happening. That's why he would never fight Stribling. That's why we have to understand that it was remarkable that this man came out of that situation to become world middleweight champion.
I'm looking at his box record. There's a guy called Alton Towns Joe Gans. It's not the original Joe Gans.
No, that's right. That wasn't him. That was a different guy. That's right. That was Allentown Joe Gans from Pennsylvania, another black fighter on the circuit. These guys just worked a circuit, often fighting each other many times, moving from town to town. But Flowers was so popular, so he put himself on the line that he drew audiences, first among black audiences, but then also mixed audiences, and in the states where he could fight white people, and the fighters, I think, pretty much like today, you go inside the game, and the issues of colour of skin matter a hell of a lot less, and the boxers are boxers. And they had, most of those had no trouble fighting him at all. So where they could, they put the fights on, and he grew more and more popular, and he got a kind of momentum going. But to do that, he had to cover thousands and thousands of miles by rail and road, to do it, fighting way too often for his own health. But he just kept on going until he broke through.
I can see the 1 year they racking up loads of fights, and like I pointed out to the viewers, that the obviously the gloves, they wasn't padded like they are now these days. There's, like I said, they're probably full of horse hair in there, and you obviously had to, and obviously the stuff he was enduring, you had to be a very strong-willed man. So let's go on to the Harry Greb fight. The Harry Greb fight, when he obviously got his chance to get the shot at title. So how did he go about getting the shot at the title and against Harry Greb?
Yeah, he fought the guy I mentioned earlier in the interview, Mike McTeague, who'd been light heavyweight champion, who was a tough guy, a bit of a spoiler, who'd had bad hands, didn't fight as often as he used to, and they wanted a charity night. just before Christmas in 1925, and at Madison Square Garden, they made a fight. They didn't really want between Mike McTeague and Tiger Flowers, and Flowers was popular, but McTeague was going to spoil all night. They worried that it wouldn't be a good fight for their punters, but it was the only thing they could get. And when it came to it, Flowers, apparently there's no film of it, but Flowers, according to reports, just outworked McTeague, who didn't want to be there really, who just did what was necessary and got through the fight. That's the impression you get anyway. And McTeague just got through it, survived, countered, fiddled, and got the decision. And there was an outcry, there was an outrage amongst all the reporters at ringside. Pretty much all of them were saying, this is a complete disgrace, it's an embarrassment. We think we get bad decisions now. Well, they had them then as well. And almost as a reaction, Flowers got huge sympathy from that, and the great promoter Tex Rickard liked him because he gave value and made the Greb fight. Wow. He got them both together and made it. Greb was a great fighter who never had a problem with he didn't care who he fought. He'd fight anybody, and he never barred a black fighter. And he was the sort of guy who would have fought Jack Dempsey. He wanted to fight Jack Dempsey, the heavyweight champion, who was pretty much feared at the time. Greb didn't fear him. He'd have fought him. He bust him up in sparring, and he didn't care. And so by then, to be fair to Greb's reputation, now he was struggling. He was almost blind, and he was on his last stretch of his career, and Flowers got him at the right time. But they had fought before in a no-decision, non-title fight, and reports are conflicting. There are some people thought Greb had won it. There were others who thought Flowers won it, but difficult to tell. And enough thought Flowers won it to make a case for him winning the return for the championship when it did come. And Flowers fought out of his skin, didn't stop throwing punches, kept doing what he does. The reports suggest he was just as unorthodox and unpredictable as Greb was without the fouls. Greb was a legend for taking the law into his own hands. He saw referees as interfering policemen and didn't appreciate their presence in the ring at all, so he liked to do what he wanted. And Flowers would match him. If he was fouled, he wouldn't put up with it. But at one point, he stood back and says, is alleged to have said, Mr. Greb, I don't really mind you fouling me all night long, but please don't take the Lord's name in vain. And Greb stopped swearing. From that moment on, he said, I just burst out laughing and I couldn't swear. What was the point? And fouling, what's the point in that? Because the guy was with me all the way. So it was a hard 15-round fight. And maybe as a reaction to the McTeague decision, Flowers got the verdict. It was very, very close. And he got a split decision, and he won the middleweight championship. And of course, Georgia went mad. White and black celebrated his victory in Georgia. He was one of theirs, and they recognised that, and they recognised his character. He wasn't Jack Johnson, who'd provoked people into outrage by parading white women around all over the place and doing what he wanted. A wholly different character, and obviously a very admirable one in very many ways. But the reaction he had was to cause problems, and Flowers wasn't like that. People respected what he was, and that he'd invested his money in institutions in Georgia, in Atlanta, where he was living by then. And he and his wife were straightforward, ordinary Christian people, so he'd got a lot of support. When he won the title, people were glad for him.
You're actually very surprised when you said that white and black was that reminded me of Joe Louis. I think maybe he may have helped in the whole thing with Joe Louis. I mean, he won the title around when Joe Lewis was just coming onto the scene. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, I think he did.
Yeah.
I think he formed a bridge between Johnson and Lewis, and fighters, later fighters like Ray Robinson and the baseball star Jackie Robinson, maybe even Jesse Owens, who won those golds in the 1936 Olympics. Although he was an amateur, he got his chances. I think Flowers' his contribution to sporting culture in America is vastly underrated. Has been forgotten. It's been forgotten that he broke barriers. Yeah. With his own character.
Yeah, because they will say Joe Lewis, but obviously he's before Joe Lewis's time, and obviously Jack Lawson did provoke a lot of people, and because a lot of fight films was lost. I don't know, maybe that's probably why the Tiger Flowers film was probably lost, but a lot of fight film was banned.
Yeah, that's right. The Jack Johnson fight. There was a law in well, I think it was a federal law that banned the transportation of films, and therefore films of Johnson were even when he lost the title against Jess Willard, the movie wasn't seen, and that's why Johnson was able to say, "I lay down, it was a fix." And nobody could see the film at the time. It did exist, but in the end, it wasn't seen until the late 50s. Yeah, and so that was people didn't see these things happen for themselves. But Tiger Flowers, they did make a movie. His manager Walk Miller made a documentary that was shown in theatres. A fairly fictitious thing, I would imagine. Walk Miller was a publicist as well as a manager, and he did his job of promoting Flowers to the championship. But it would have been interesting now to see the film, but all copies appear to have been lost, and if any have survived, I guess the film has deteriorated to the point where it would be unviewable. That's the general view now, and the same with the footage of his fights.
It's a shame, but like I said, like you said, obviously you bringing up the book and that it will start some interest. I mean, I mentioned it to Clean Alcott, and there's a book on Tiger Flowers. She was very interested. So, I didn't know that. I was interested. Maybe I can get you two talking at some point. Yeah,
that'd be fun.
Yeah. Because are you on Skype?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay, it's a shame because he's on Skype as well. But we'll sort about that. We'll talk about that after the interview anyway. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about. So he had a rematch again after he won the battle, and obviously Georgia's all proud of him, which is like the only time I remember that when obviously the time was when Joe Lewis. But so he had a rematch with him, and then he lost the title to Mickey Walker. What went about that for him to lose his title against Mickey Walker? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He beat Greb again and ended Greb's career. Greb then died on an operating table in Atlantic City, and he defended his title against Mickey Walker. Flowers went to Chicago, and his manager agreed a deal with Walker's extremely wily manager Doc Kearns, who'd managed Jack Dempsey to his great years, and he couldn't get more contrasting figures than Mickey Walker and Doc Kearns and Walk Miller, and particularly Tiger Flowers. I mean, Kearns and Walker were guys who inhabited every night spot in whatever city they could get, and they didn't sleep, and they loved parading themselves around and spending money they didn't have, and spending every bit of money they did have, and enjoying themselves hugely. And Flowers obviously was the complete opposite to that. But Kearns knew the bad side of life far better than Flowers could ever do, and his manager was not made of his cloth, but was certainly an outsider in that world. And Kearns knew Al Capone, which is where the suspicions come in. The fight was in Chicago. It was close again. I mean, most people thought Flowers had won. Most reports that I've seen suggested Flowers had won, and won in spite of 2 flash knockdowns, which didn't count the way they do now. He didn't get a 10-8 round for those. It was just, he may not even get the round. People didn't worry so much. If somebody just hit the ground with a bump, jumped straight back up and got on with it. And most people thought that Flowers had won the fight, but he didn't get it. He lost it. There was a referee, no judges, and at the end Walker had got it. And there was speculation around that it was a Capone-influenced decision, that there was a lot of money riding on Walker, and it maybe that was the case. And certainly he thought he would get another chance. It was a rematch clause was contracted, but they just ignored it. They didn't want to know. They'd got the title. Flowers didn't matter anymore. They could do what they wanted, and he spent the rest of his career and life waiting for his chance to get his title back. But it wasn't going to happen. And it's ironic that Walker was ordered to defend against him at the time when he died, but whether it would have ever happened, we still can't know, because Kearns could have pulled some strings and done what he did best and manipulated and manoeuvred, and it was, they were out of their depth in that kind of society, and his title was never going to be his for a long time, I don't think. He reigned for 10 months, and that wasn't bad. But then he spent the next year back on the road until it caught up with him.
Yeah, I was going to say, so this is a first. So he wins against Harry Greff and repeats the thing, and these are 15 rounders. Then he goes to Chicago against Mickey Walker, and it's a 10 rounder.
Yeah.
Why would he?
Well, they have different rules for different states.
Oh, okay.
And the fight was made over 10 rounds. I can't remember what the Illinois rules were without looking back. Sorry, it's a while since I wrote it. But certainly in some states they only allowed 10 rounders. Whether Kearns and Walt Miller agreed 10 rounds and didn't have to, that would be typical of Miller's naivety to agree to something like that. But Kearns would know that the lighter man had a better chance over a shorter distance.
Yeah. The referee, I'm looking at on Boxer right now. I said the referee Ben Younger said that the decision was based for Walker because he was hitting the cleaner punches, and Flower was only throwing slaps with open gloves.
Well, that's a thing that was levelled against him, that he did slap, but he threw so many punches that they weren't all slaps, and the rules were different then. Some states allowed it, some didn't. Some even allowed backhanders, which they don't do now. And he threw punches from everywhere, and he was on top of you all the time. And that's an old argument, isn't it? We've heard that one many a time from a referee. But he threw the cleaner punches.
Yeah, you know what's amazing? Yeah. You know what's amazing to me as I'm looking at the record? I'm not too sure. I don't think he ever got knocked out, and even when he finished his career, unlike most fighters, he finished his career on a win. He was winning fights. He seemed like he probably just maybe lost out of interest, but he looked like he was.
He fought. His last fight was against a 200-pound heavyweight called Leo Gates.
Yeah,
and he repeatedly conceded huge amounts of weight, and unfortunately that it was a hard way of life, and it took his toll. He'd got scar tissue, he'd been having headaches, dizzy spells, and people then didn't know what we know now about the cost of boxing, about the cost of getting hit in the head hard and often. And he took shots. He must have done over that number of fights. He fought when he was still bruised and sore from the previous week, maybe when he was still cut a little bit. He just carried on. And eventually it caught up with him, and he had scar tissue forming lumps of gristle on his face, above his eyebrows, particularly above the right eyebrow, and he got the dizzy spells, and they put it down to sinus problems, which possible but unlikely that it would cause the discomfort that he was having completely. I think he was suffering from the effects of his career, but obviously you can't prove it. So they put him in for a hospital operation in a clinic, not a hospital, of a respected New York surgeon called Wilford Freilich in 1927, in November 27, just after he'd had his last fight. And it was supposed to be routine. It was supposed to be just a question of removing the gristle, but and repairing his face. But it was supposed to be so minor that he didn't even tell his wife about it. And she was back in Georgia. He went under the knife in New York, and he died the same day. He died without ever really recovering from the surgery, and that was then sparked off the terrible mourning, and his life had ended suddenly and dreadfully, and there were a lot of repercussions. I've gone into the book into Freilich's competence level, and I think there were holes in his reputation that suggested he shouldn't have been anywhere near handing out anaesthetic when they didn't really know what they were doing. And there were a lot of people at the time who said if it was a black medical team working with him, he wouldn't have died. But the fact that was the response of African American writers, put it like that, and they were very angry, very anguished, and there were a lot of recriminations, but nobody got anywhere. But they didn't know that Freilich had the deficiencies that I suggest in the book were the case.
Yeah.
I won't go into them in here, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest he was a bit of a charlatan, and that was the tragedy, that his life ended when maybe it shouldn't have done. It didn't need to. Certainly, it didn't need to. A proper, competent doctor, I think, would have treated him differently. But there we go. That's in the book, and so's the aftermath of the death, when his body was taken back to Georgia, and he was given a huge funeral that almost befitted a politician, a great statesman, rather than a fighter. There was general mourning and general regret, and then it's without giving the whole story away, his manager then turned from being, in another dramatic twist, the manager turned from being the guy he thought of as a friend, the guy who'd been with him all that time, suddenly tried to take possession of his estate and tried to put his wife in an asylum and his daughter in an orphanage, by stealing his money, basically.
Wow.
By trying to take his money, and that's a twist that the book covers.
Huh.
And the African American journalists of the time quite rightly came out in force and did manage to save the house from his manager and save his possessions, but they were still forced out and forced away from their home by some kind of white racist pressure in the end, that probably wouldn't have happened if Tiger Flowers had lived.
Yeah. Oh man, Swiss as well. It's got me gripped, me. I'm looking to go and find the book, and I reckon everyone listening to is probably gonna go definitely go and read up on this book and read up about this historical man and his historical life in boxing, which a lot of people obviously missed. And with you, this I'm actually very I have a lot to say at this, bro. It's got you gripped. I can see why you went and researched it and things. It's a tragic, but it's a tragic story. But these sort of things happen in the fight game, and he was a great man. I mean, he's obviously going to remember as an all-time great. It's a shame it's a shame the way it ended, man. It's a shame. It's a shame. I hope someone finds the fight footage. Maybe it is been you know, maybe it is thing, but maybe you never know. Someone can come out with that footage. I mean, they discovered.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
We can all dream of seeing him. It would be great to see him. I think if we did, styles have changed so much that we'd probably think, wow, he was different. But I think as agricultural as his style might seem to us now, he was a southpaw who threw punches from everywhere and anywhere. The thing that would come through was the work rate, the kind of nature of the fact that the man put himself on the line so much that he attracted people to see him because he gave value all the time, every fight. And yeah, great fighter, and I feel privileged to have at least attempted to have told his story. I think all books like this are abandoned, not finished, because you can never ever get far enough. But I've tried my best, and I hope people like it, or at least are interested in it.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. Well, Bob, man, is there anything else that you want to share with a guy that you feel like that, you know, anything you know you didn't want to share, or you didn't get the chance to say on Sky about the book, or do you think we've discovered everything that you might say? Because I know I've been prompting you about questions. That anything you might want to get out about the book or anything, or?
No, I think that it's there for people to find. It's there for people to see. You know, I have some available, and if people want to contact me through Twitter or something, I guess you say that your Twitter is Bob Mee 1. If somebody wants to contact me for a signed copy, they're very welcome. Otherwise, yeah, if you find his story interesting, then please look further. And yeah, I feel that there will have been more to it than I can get to, because I'm writing so much longer. I did try to contact his family. I did have contact with them. There's a piece in the book about how that went, and I'm very pleased with the help that I did have, but I feel great frustration that perhaps without telling you the ends of the book, that I didn't get far enough with that. And maybe in future, if any member of Tiger Flower's family and descendants now have any family stories to tell, there's a for maybe a later edition that could be added in and maybe reworked. But that would be very welcome if anybody did want to do that. But yeah, it's been a privilege to write it, and I'm glad I have.
Yeah, we are as well, and it's been a privilege you coming down and coming to the YouTube boxing community and talking to about that. I'm gonna put your Twitter handle underneath and how people can contact you. And yeah, man, it's been a great listen, and yeah, I enjoyed it very much. Yeah, so okay, alright, then I'm gonna sign out then. Alright, and fight fans. Hopefully, we get to talk Bob Mee again. Maybe with Clean Elcott. That'd be great. I'd enjoy that. And yeah. Thanks very much, Bob. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Sure. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Okay then. Bye.